Hello and welcome to another edition of Fantasy Football Freaks. I'm Jason, he's Vaz, and today we've got a very important strategy to talk about with Dynasty Fantasy Football Leagues. This is hands down the best strategy to use. There's so many reasons why both Vaz and I have employed the strategy, and when executed correctly, it is just domination for years and years to come. Vaz, I know you've used it. I've used it. I mean, this is about the best thing that you should do when it comes to dynasty startups.
Yeah, this is my go-to. This is what I live by. I call it the productive struggle. It's a term I stole from another YouTube channel called Bunk Bed Breakdowns. But yeah, it's the strategy I go to every single startup, and it allows you to, like you said, dominate for years.
Yeah, I call it the process. And I accidentally came across this a couple of years ago when I joined your startup. It was the first time that we actually played fantasy football together. And what happened for me was not planned, but it just kind of turned into this. And what I did was I think I was drafting ninth overall in the first round. It was a 14-team super flex, and I was trying to decide between drafting Kyler Murray at ninth overall or somebody else. And I didn't like Murray there at ninth. I was thinking I'm not going to be able to get him in the second round on the way back because it's a 14 team. And when I thought about it, I was like, like maybe I can just trade back, get a first round pick the year after, and then, go after some other pieces instead because,
And start
he was
targeting
not
young
the
as
piece
well.
that I like. And
Yeah.
then I ended up thinking, wait, what if I trade another second round pick? And then I ended up trading the other second round pick that I got, as well as my own second round pick. I didn't pick until I think it was the fourth round, but I was able to amass 3 or 4 first round picks the year after. So obviously, I was basically tanking the first year with the thought of amassing as many first round picks the year after and trying to build for the future, but getting a head start on the rebuild right from the draft. It wasn't my original intention. It turned into that. You caught on to what I was doing very quickly and then basically did a better version of what I was sort of ending up doing.
Okay, well, I think you basically nailed the gist of what it is. It's trading back as often as you can to acquire value, right? Your mindset in this strategy is just to acquire as much value as possible. You're always thinking about acquiring value. And rookie picks are the cheapest in the startup when people can draft those shiny new toys and they don't care about those picks that are 1 or 2 years away, right? So and then the greatest thing about acquiring those picks is, unlike the players that are drafted, which usually lose value, those picks only gain value. So yeah, just the mindset of always acquiring value. And like you said, like you traded back multiple times, got multiple first round picks, and then your league mates don't see you as a contender or as opposition to their strategy, and they'll continue to work with you. So that's another great point
Yeah, I
that
mean,
you.
whenever I'm making any sort of a trade in fantasy football, I'm always trying to think of a deal that benefits both of us. I want to find a
Right.
mutually beneficial trade where, I can accomplish my goal and you can accomplish yours. The thing is, for a dynasty startup, it's usually 12 or 14 teams that are all competing against each other to
Yeah.
win in week one of year one. Everyone's trying to
Yeah.
win that championship in the first year. It's not very
And it's so
often.
hard to do.
Yeah, because you're just 1 in 12.
Yeah.
But if I can think about the year after when, some of the teams have become weaker, then by then,
Right.
it becomes more of like a 1 in 5 or a 1 in 6 chance rather than 1 in 12. So
Yeah.
in that sense, you have a better chance of going for something later on, as opposed to competing with everyone. You're narrowing down the field and giving yourself more value in the
Yeah,
future.
exactly. And I don't look at it as next year as well. I think that's important to note. I kind of view this as like a 2 year build.
Yeah.
Like I'm targeting year three as the year where I'm set up to dominate.
Yeah.
Because so even in the startup, when I'm trying to acquire picks, I'm not just trying to acquire picks next year. I value the picks 2 years out just as much.
Yeah.
Okay. And those picks 2 years out, we don't know what's going to happen with those teams, right? They could end up being terrible by that point. So those picks could be like lottery picks, high picks that are going to be super value, like foundational pieces for your dynasty team that you got for super cheap, right?
Mhm.
So
And
yeah.
don't be afraid to accept second and third round picks if you're not giving up very much. The
Okay,
real
right.
important key to this, and we'll talk about this over and over again today, is you have to understand the value of the pick that you're giving up in order to trade down. And you have to understand the value of the pick that you're trying to acquire in the future, because
Yeah.
future value, those are always going up, like buying land somewhere. They're always going up. Whereas, selling your pick in the draft, it's like selling a new car. As soon as it goes off the lot, it's already starting to devalue. But you have to
Right.
understand what the difference is so that number one, you make sure that you're benefiting, but then also number two, so that you can sell it to the other guy to make it seem like he's getting a deal on what he's trying to do, because he's trying to win now. You need to sell it as, if you want to win this year, you're competing against 11 other teams. In order to get a leg up, I'm going to let you move up and get another star onto your team. And all you're going to give up is this pick, next year or a couple of years later. If you can sell it in that way, then you're both going to benefit, hopefully you a little bit more.
Mm. So I think it's an important practice to um, identify the value of the player in the range that you're at in the draft. So
Yes.
let's say that you're in the second round and the best player on the board is, for example, like Chris Olave. Okay. And if you end up staying at this pick, you're going to grab Chris Olave. You know that. A young receiver, it fits your team strategy, right? It fits your team build. Now you look at Chris Olave and you think, okay, he's probably worth slightly less than, let's say, two random first round picks in my mind. Okay, so
Yeah.
Chris Olave is around, let's say he's worth around two first round picks. Okay, now if I can move from the back of the second, which is worth two random first round picks, to let's say the middle of the fourth, which in my opinion is probably Devonta Smith, which is maybe worth like a random first and two random seconds or something like that. Okay, so slightly less than Chris Olave, but not a significant amount. Okay, but if I can move back from the end of the second to the middle of the fourth and get a first round pick, now suddenly I've got Devonta Smith, who's worth a first and 2 seconds, and a first, as opposed to two random firsts. I've gained 2 seconds of value, if you can understand what I'm saying. So then,
Absolutely. And
so then I
Devontae
will
Smith
take.
has got value as well. That's another player that you can eventually trade for a first round pick plus again.
And I don't have to pick there. I don't have,
Yeah.
like, I can trade back from that pick as well. I'm just pinpointing what I think the value is in that range, right?
Yeah.
So let's say I want to move from 212, which is where I would have taken Chris Olave, to the middle of the fourth, let's say 406, and grab an extra first. I'll tell you an important strategy that I will use. Okay. I will take my 212 and I'll send out an offer to the person at 406, okay, for that pick plus an additional first. So my offer will look like 212 for 406 and a future first. Okay. Then, because I know 406 is where I want to go, I will send the same offer to 405. Okay, so 212 for 405 and a future first. I'll send the same offer to 404, 212 for 404 and a future first, 212 to 403 and a future first, maybe even 212 to 407 and a future first if I think it's similar. And then I'll send out so many offers to everybody, but don't tell them I'm sending out offers, of course. But send out offers to so many people, just hoping one hits. And if one hits, I'm glad, and I've accomplished my goal of trading back and acquiring that future first.
Absolutely. Ideally, you want it to be the 401, but
Yeah,
certainly you'll be happy with 406 or 407, as you mentioned. And like you said, it's I think an important key to this, like you mentioned, is when you send those trades out, you're sending each trade out to each individual rather than announcing in the group chat, "Hey everybody, I
yeah,
want to
yeah. We
trade
won't be
back
doing
in
that.
the in this round in order to acquire extra first round picks next year because I'm using a tanking strategy,
Yeah,
everyone."
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
rather than
Yeah,
announcing it in that way, where, because the last thing you want to do is for people to catch on early
yeah,
enough that other people can try to join you in the
yeah.
strategy, because if you have a
Very important.
monopoly on a strategy and you're the only one selling and you have 11 other teams that are buying, then you're going to get better value for these
Of
future
course.
draft picks and anything that you trade back. But if there's 3 or 4 teams that kind of pick up on what you're doing and they decide that they're going to try to do the same strategy, then all of a sudden it becomes 4 teams selling to 8. So the market becomes saturated and you're not going to get the same value as you would if you were doing it secretly. And that's exactly what happened to me because I employed this strategy first. And then Vaz, you copied me and then basically outdid me.
Yeah, very well said, by the way. That is super important. And I will say one thing is that if you do notice another owner trying a similar strategy, don't shy away from doing the strategy.
Just do
Just
it
try to
better.
do it. Yeah, just do it better. Yeah. There will always be, I'd say the vast majority of the teams in the league that do want to win year one.
Yeah.
Okay. So don't worry about it. You'll always have a buyer. Okay. But yeah, don't shy away from the strategy. If you see other people doing it, just do it better.
But and make sure that you understand the value of each of those picks because you don't want to overpay for a first round pick just because you want to, execute this strategy. You have to make sure that you understand what it is that you're giving up. Imagine the player that you'd be
Yeah.
picking in that slot and imagine, is it worth it for me to only get what might be a late round first because that team's going to be competing. Or
Yes.
perhaps sometimes a better strategy is rather than taking the first round pick from the year to come, take it for 2 years to come because there might be a better chance that that team, randomly runs into injury problems, what have you, but is less successful the year after rather than
Yeah.
the year of.
You're totally right. Yeah. Yeah. I think like ultimately, even though you're trying this strategy, you do want to acquire those foundational pieces, right? And the easiest way to acquire them is in the startup. So let's like look at, for example, like if you're drafting in round one, okay, like you said, you wanted to draft Kyler Murray and instead you decide to move back. It might have been a mistake because you know what? Kyler Murray is a great piece for your fantasy team, right? Even now, if you had drafted Kyler Murray at 109 2 years ago, he's still about worth about that value right now, right?
Mhm.
I don't remember what you end up taking later, but I'm just saying that sometimes just drafting that player is the best strategy. So, like for example, if I'm drafting at 101, I'm often drafting at the top end of drafts in these leagues because I value that position, grabbing that stud quarterback, right? So if let's say I've got the 101, okay, let's just do a hypothetical here. I could grab Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, okay, or I could look to trade back and grab a future first. Now, I'm often going to just pick that quarterback because once I have that quarterback on my team, once anybody has Patrick Mahomes on their team, they don't trade them. They just keep Patrick Mahomes. He's a foundational piece of your team and he's impossible to get in a trade. Okay. So I'm perfectly fine grabbing those players are foundational pieces and then looking to move back starting in round two. Okay. But that being said, if I could take that 101 and move back to like 104 or 105 and grab a future first, I'm considering that. So if I could take, what would be Patrick Mahomes and turn it into Joe Burrow and a first, okay, I'll consider that. But I'm not going too far back to where I'm turning Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen into Trevor Lawrence in a future first. No, I'm not doing that. Okay, I view Josh Allen as much more valuable than Trevor Lawrence in a future first. So you have to think about like the foundational pieces you want to get on your fantasy team. It's okay to draft some of those, basically, is my point.
Yeah. And the key here being also when you're drafting players, there are certain type of players that you want, and there are certain type of players that you want to stay away from. So,
Yeah, right.
as you mentioned, we're talking quarterbacks right now, but quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends, we basically want to stay away from running backs, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You, for the most part, want to totally stay away from running backs because they do lose value the quickest, right? Uh,
And they also
Quarterbacks can
help you
play to
win.
forward, as we've seen. And they absolutely right. Another goal you should have is to field a very weak starting lineup year one so that you can get that 101, 102 in the next year's draft and grab an additional foundational piece for your dynasty team. If you start drafting all these running backs, suddenly you're going to be competing for a playoff spot, which is not what you want to be doing. Yeah, but an important thing you mentioned is quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends. These players maintain value longer than running backs because they play longer and people still want them when they're 24, 25. Once a running back hits 24, 25, they're already on the downward trajectory of their careers, right?
Absolutely. And for me, one of the things that I will do on occasion is if there's a running back that's older that people are ignoring because he's old and his
In the
value
later
drops.
rounds, right?
Yeah, yeah, very, very later rounds. But like
Yeah.
once all the starters are taken and people are still ignoring certain running backs because of their age, once again, you've got to be good at assessing value. But if you can get Derrick Henry, let's say even James Conner, like in the teen sort of rounds, and you're not giving up too much to get them, then
Yeah.
I think they can be valuable if you're using them as trade value in season, because running back injuries happen all the time. And if you're getting them late enough and you're able to, trade them mid-season or early in the season for a first round pick or 2 seconds or something like that, consider the player that I could take right now in round 13 or 14. Is this player somebody that I could trade for 2 second-round picks next year? And if your answer is no, then I think it's safer to take a guy like James Conner, like Derrick Henry, somebody that can give you trade value later on.
Yeah, totally right. And you know what? I think there's an important note here as well. In year one and year two, when all the other teams are trying to win, you're not. Okay. Your one goal is to win trades. So while other players are thinking, like, okay, Derrick Henry can give me a championship. Okay. You're selling Derrick Henry for 2 seconds. For example, you're selling Derrick Henry for 2 seconds because you're gaining value in those draft picks, right? As soon as the offseason hits, one of those seconds is worth more than Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've gained considerable value while that team is trying to win a championship. So yeah, like when everybody else is trying to win, you are not trying to win. You're just trying to gain value in years one and year two. So by the time year three hits and your team is ready, you've spent 2 years gaining value while everybody else has been losing value trying to win. That's why your team will be set up to be a juggernaut starting from year three.
Absolutely. And the focus is totally different as well, because like you mentioned, when you're trying to win a championship, you're going to do everything possible to win that championship, because you might be thinking, when am I going to be a top four team again? I'm a top
Right.
four team right now. I have to do what it takes to win this championship. I'm going to give up a late first round pick or 2 second-round picks to get a Derrick Henry. Who in their right mind would do that? But if you see that as what you have to do to win the championship, you'll do anything you can. It's
Yeah.
like a high school kid trying to get laid. I mean, he's trying to do everything he can to get noticed and to try to get laid. He's going to do stupid things because he's not thinking straight. But
Yeah.
these are things that you wouldn't normally do in your right mind. But the best part about when you're in a rebuild from the get-go is your focus is focused right. You're not thinking with your dick, you're thinking with your mind. You know exactly
Yeah.
what you're trying to accomplish, and you can do things mathematically. You can do things that make sense. And as an example, another thing that makes sense is when injuries do happen. I remember there was one year where, because I started off in the rebuild, I was able to get Saquon Barkley for mere scraps. I think it was like James Conner, and it wasn't even James Conner. I want to say maybe it was like Mike Smith or someone like that. It was ridiculously bad pieces in order to get a guy who was out for the season, but I was able to get him on the cheap because I was giving up 2 or 3 pieces that made sense now to a guy that, had to trade Barkley away because he was trying to win now.
Right. So yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that being laid thing, getting laid thing. Like when you're trying to get laid, you're stressed out about, I need to get laid, right? So the thing is, when you're trying to win in Dynasty, you're stressed out. Like, oh my God, I just lost my running back to injury. What am I going to do? Okay, I'm going to trade this pick and grab another running back and everything will be okay, right? When you're not trying to win, you're clear. Your mind is clear. You're not stressed. Okay. If I can do this, I can add value this way and whatnot, right? So about injuries, when you're doing this productive struggle approach, injuries suddenly become your ally rather than your enemy, right? You can acquire those injured players that go down and like acquire them on the cheap. But you could also take your handcuff quarterbacks, your backup running backs that are worth almost nothing, and trade them to those teams that are competing for picks that are very valuable. So yeah, that's a huge important point that you made. Like when injuries happen, they are your ally when you're using this approach, not your enemy.
Yeah, like especially any team that's competing and their player gets injured, especially if they're out for the season, immediately you should be trying to contact that team. If
Yeah,
you have a piece that can, alleviate their stress,
yeah,
then make those offers and say, "Hey, I'll give you this." And he might not be as good as Anthony Richardson. He might not be as good as Kirk Cousins or
right.
Saquon Barkley, but I'll give you this. That they're going to be, a fill gap, and hopefully by then you'll have all of these extra picks, ideally first, but sometimes you're going to have second and third round picks that are extras as well. And the good thing
Yep.
about that is when there is a gap between trying to acquire an injured Richardson, an injured Barkley, and they're like, well, like I really don't want to give that. I was like, I'll tell you what, I'll throw in a second. I'll throw
Yeah.
in a third because you have
Yeah.
these extra later round picks that you've acquired as well. You have these
Yeah.
things to fill the gap to make that trade happen.
Yeah, just because you've acquired all these picks doesn't mean you have to wait for the draft to use them, right? You can trade them away when they've increased in value. So yeah, like acquire these picks, not all of them to be used, some of them to be traded away to grab what you need or to yeah, like fill a gap, like you said. Another important note is in the startup, in the later rounds, when it's almost impossible to hit those home runs, right? Like you're of course, if you want to take a swing on a home run guy in the startup, go for it in rounds 15, 16. But if you can't find that guy, it's a valid strategy to take those handcuffs, right? Those Gardner Minshews, so that if Anthony Richardson does go down, you can sell off Gardner Minshew for a second and and get that immense value, right? So yeah, like I've used that strategy too. And in like the 20s of the startup, when everybody you pick is going to end up off your roster in a year anyways, grab those backups, grab those handcuffs that if an injury does hit, could turn into a second round pick.
Absolutely. And especially quarterbacks, because there's a finite number of quarterbacks, not just
Yeah.
starters, but good backups as well. Like you mentioned,
Yeah.
like your Gardner Minshews, your Tyrod Taylors, and,
Right.
people like that that can be productive if there's an injury to be
Yeah.
able to have them. It's much like, if you can't, I mean, I would target a number of minimum 5 to 6 quarterbacks, and
Yeah.
maybe even it's okay to have 8 or 9 quarterbacks
Mhm.
on your roster with just two
Yeah.
or three running backs, because the
Yeah.
running backs are going to lose value anyways. Whereas you can, swing for the fences with these backup quarterbacks that might be able to provide you value. And who knows, maybe that backup quarterback turns into Brock Purdy. You never know.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? I am punting on running back early, but like you said, if I can grab some running backs late, I will do it. Like if I could grab some backup running backs like a Zamir White, right? That could turn into a championship winner when Josh Jacobs goes down in the fantasy playoffs. Yeah, like I will grab those guys because I can trade them away if something happens. I'm still trying to grab those young running backs if possible, but yeah, like if I have to grab a few older running backs in the late rounds that could have some trade value, I'm doing it too. Yeah, the one thing is you don't want to be grabbing running backs early because then they score you fantasy points. But we're talking later now, later in the draft.
Yeah. When we talk about redraft fantasy football, I like to think of that as a science, and much like playing limit poker. Whereas when you play dynasty football, I believe it's more of an art, like no limit Texas Hold'em. So when you're doing that, one of the biggest difference is the ability to trade, because just because you put a trade out there doesn't mean that it's going to be accepted. And like I said, it's important that you keep it in the down low. You don't want to make it public. But one of the things that I like to do when selling this trade is, especially if no one's done this trade yet. So when you're targeting the first customer and saying, "Hey,
Uh-huh.
look, I want to trade back from my first round pick," one of the things that I'll say is, "Hey, I'm considering not going for it this year. And, because of that, I'm willing to trade back if you're willing to give me your first round pick for next year. And that will mean that you have one less team to compete against this year. And
Yep.
it's also going to make you stronger than every other team this year, because everyone is everyone else is just going to have their basic normal value, whereas you're going to have the value of a first round pick next year added to your team. You're going to be mathematically stronger than everyone else. And if you can sell it to that person in that way, they're going to be more likely to go after it. On the flip side, if you once you've completed a trade and now there's already one person that is stronger than every other team because they've traded away their first round pick for next year, every other team, you're going to try to sell it to them as if you need to catch up. Look, are you playing for second? Are you playing for third? Do you just want to be like a middling team, or do you want to like go after it? And, look at team number 5. They've gained an extra first round pick. They're the strongest team right now. But I'll tell you what, I'll give you my second round pick to trade back if you're willing to give me your first round pick next year. So looking at the angle from the other team's perspective as to how they're going to benefit from this trade, sell it to them in that way so that you're going to be mutually beneficial, but they're going to feel good about it because they have their agenda, which is different from yours.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? I think you don't even have to sell it as much as you're saying you do, because other teams will notice that a team has traded up, and then if they want to win, they will know that they have to do something similar as well to catch up, right? So yeah, like I think you're saying to sell it to them in like kind of a vocal way, but I'm not even sure you have to. People will recognize that. And then another thing is like when you're trading in drafts, okay? One thing I should just qualify here, or just make sure that everybody understands, is we're talking about slow drafts, right?
Yeah.
Like with 8-hour time limits. This strategy is not so applicable to drafts where you're drafting every minute or two. Like, yeah. So this is just when you're doing slow drafts. And if you haven't tried slow drafts before, definitely give them a go. They're great fun, and there's so much trades going on in slow drafts.
Absolutely. Let's take a look at examples, because both of us have employed this strategy. I've talked about, my situation trading out of Kyler Murray to move back in that league. Like I mentioned, eventually I didn't pick until the 4th round. My mistake in the 4th round was I took DeAndre Swift as the first player I actually drafted, but I went with a running back. Later in that round, I eventually ended up taking Jerry Jeudy as well as CeeDee Lamb and Tua, and that was the base of my team. In hindsight, I was thinking to win the next year, and I think that's why I took Swift. But in hindsight, I would not have taken Swift, and I would have traded back again if possible to take more quarterbacks, or like Justin Herbert was available at that time as an example. I didn't take him. So those were some of my mistakes. Let's talk about some of the things that you've done in the past that have worked for you.
Okay, well, I think your main mistake was you got incredible value early in the draft. First 3 rounds, you got incredible value, but you stopped. You stopped gaining that value. You stopped trading back. You started grabbing, okay, I need to grab some players. I'm going to win next year, right?
Yeah.
No, just keep thinking value, 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 value. In round 4, can I trade back here? Round 5, can I trade back here? Okay, suddenly Jerry Jeudy, I know Jerry Jeudy didn't really work out, but suddenly Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb are a value to draft. Okay, I'll draft them. Okay. But yeah, I think in your example, you kind of stopped trading back.
I did, yeah.
And yeah, I would have continued to trade back and continued to add value to that start. Your start was fantastic. Okay, so you want to discuss one of my leagues, right?
Yeah.
I started from the 101 in this draft, correct?
Yep.
Okay, and so I had the option here of trying to trade back, and I think I probably explored it, but I ended up selecting Josh Allen at the 101. And as I mentioned earlier, it's almost impossible to grab these pieces later. So even though you're trying this strategy, do not be afraid of making a pick early in the draft. These quarterbacks are impossible to get, and they are worth a ton. Like we're talking, they're worth 4 first-round picks. They're worth maybe 5 first-round picks. So it's okay to draft one here. Like once you get past 105, if you're trading back from 101, you're trading back only to maybe 104. Okay. Don't go back to the end of the first to grab a first round pick. Okay. If you can't trade back to 104, draft at 101. And I did in this instance, and I grabbed Josh Allen. Then if you look at this draft board, I think it shows like the first 13 rounds. I did not pick again in my original draft slot for the entire first 13 rounds. And then let's look at the players selected here. Austin Eckler, Michael Carter in round 5, like Ezekiel Elliott in round 7. This is 2 years ago. These players have no, like Michael Carter, no value. Austin Eckler, almost no value. Marcus Mariota there. Like these players have no value. They've lost all value. So when other people were taking these old players that have no value, I was adding rookie picks to my team. I was adding young receivers, young tight ends that, I knew would maintain their value. So now, 3 years on, my team is a juggernaut looking to win. My team is a true dynasty that can compete for, not only compete, but be the top team for 6, 7 years.
Mm-hmm. And
All
also
because,
still have first round picks to boot on top of that.
right. Yeah. Maybe I'm going to win this year, and then I'm going to be drafting in the top 5 the next year. So, okay. So let's look at some of the trades I made. Okay. So if you can show the first one, I traded away my I traded away my second, which would have been the 212, I guess, and a fifth and an eighth. Let's ignore those because I received back a fifth and an eighth for a fourth and a future first. So basically, I traded my 212 to get to the middle of the 4th round and acquired a future first.
Yeah.
So this is exactly the type of trade you want to make.
Yeah.
You're moving back from the 212, which ended up being what, Austin Eckler, okay, to the middle of the 4th, and then grabbing a very, very valuable piece that can be a foundational piece still.
Yeah.
And you're getting appropriate value to move back.
And
Okay, then
especially in those rounds, like you mentioned, Austin Eckler, like, when other people are thinking, I need that running back, I need that, championship running back. Whereas, that's where you're gaining value from that.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Okay, then let's look at another one here. So I guess I moved back from that pick I acquired in the middle of the 4th, perhaps, to the 5th round to acquire another future first. So, wow, this one looks like a home run for me.
Mm-hmm.
I found somebody willing to move up probably a round or a round and a half from 5 to 4, and I got an additional first round pick. So now I've turned my second round pick into a 5th round pick and 2 first round picks, right? If I valued that second round pick as equal to 2 firsts, I've acquired a free 5th round pick in the startup from my perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Next one here. I moved my 3rd round pick for a 7th round pick and a future first. This one looks not as good, clearly not as good as the previous one, but still I'm okay with it here. Oh no, I'm sorry. I acquired a first round pick 2 years out and a second round pick the next year. So I acquired a future first and second to move from round 3 to round 7. I like this more now. So it's possible that in round 3, I didn't like what was available to me. And I said, okay, I'll move back to round 7 here and grab a future first and second. It's possible that I saw the third round startup pick as about equal to a first and second future pick. Yeah. And then I thought, okay, I'm getting a free 7th here, something like that.
And a lot of times in dynasty startups, rookie picks are actually devalued as well, right? It's like the rookies of the year, like those guys are at their peak value, but the guys that haven't done anything yet, unless it's like your Justin Lawrence in year one, Trevor Lawrence, sorry, in year one, like, maybe he's taken a little bit higher, but outside of like your freaks, they're usually taken, like you mentioned, in those middle rounds, like maybe 5 to 10 is kind of where, most of the rookies will actually go.
Right. In the startup. Yeah, right. Correct.
And like to be able to trade back into those 5th to 10 rounds while acquiring first round picks next year, then you're getting, ideally all the top rookies from your startup year, and then all the top rookies from the next year as well. And that's going to be the foundation. So
you're
of your
building
team.
Very young. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And even if you miss on some of them, because you are going to miss, but everyone's going to miss. But because you have so many of them, don't worry about it because you're just going to have so many bullets.
It's funny that you mentioned that. So in this exact draft, I ended up using a 5th round pick. We drafted the rookies before the NFL draft for this startup. Okay. And I ended up using a 5th round pick in the startup on Malik Willis. Whoops. Right. Total boss. Like I just threw away my 5th round pick. But looking back 3 years, it's 2 years in the future now. Right. Doesn't matter that I wasted a 5th round pick on Malik Willis because I added so much value. My team is still a juggernaut.
Yeah.
So you can afford these misses. Everybody misses, right? Everybody makes these picks, right? But when you've given yourself all this extra ammo, it's okay to miss. Other people who've not given themselves this extra ammo, if they make a miss like that, they're ruined. Their team's ruined. They're going to have to start rebuilding from year two or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So then if you look at this next trade here, I traded away my sixth round pick for a future first and a future second. Okay, so I think at this point in the draft, in the sixth round, remember this is a 14-team league. So I think at this point in the sixth round, I viewed the sixth round pick as equal to a future first. Okay, so I thought if I can get a future first and a future second, I'm gaining value. So what I did here is I offered my sixth round pick to everybody in the league for their future first and second, and just hope one hit and one hit. So I got value for that.
And that
Okay.
turned out to be Kirk Cousins.
Oh, did it? Okay. Yeah. And I mean, Kirk Cousins, I think he might be fine with that because
Yeah.
Kirk Cousins is great, right?
But it's a win-win, right? He
It's a
wins.
win-win. Yeah.
Yeah. He gets what he wants. You get what you want too.
Yep. And then it's possible, like, I think that pick turned out to be 112, but it's possible that pick turns out to be 106 or 105. And I'm getting Jaden Daniels instead of Kirk Cousins, which is a huge win, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, then you look at this next one here. I moved from the 8th to the 9th. So hardly anything, in my opinion, and grabbed a future second. So once we've passed round 6, round 7, I'm probably not going to get any more future first round picks, but I'm still looking to acquire future seconds, future thirds later on in the draft.
Yeah. And sometimes those can be the buffer, like I mentioned, to complete a trade when you're going after an injured Anthony Richardson or an injured Saquon Barkley. When you're going after guys like that, you don't have, the exact guy to replace them that the team is looking for, but you can buffer that with some of these later draft picks that you acquire.
Right. And then here, next one here, I traded back from the 10th to the 11th to grab an additional second. And then another one here, I traded back from the 12th to the 13th to grab an additional third. So keep on trying to grab these extra picks. Okay, so this last board here, you can see the value of my team. Looking at this board here, going into year 3 this season, my team is worth considerably more value than every other team in the league after using this strategy, despite the fact that I drafted Malik Willis in round 5.
Yeah. Once again, this is really the best strategy for any startup dynasty league. Just think of it as you're punting years 1 and 2. You're trading out of the first round. You're trading out of the second round, perhaps trading out if the value is there. Don't be giving up Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen just because. But if the value is there to trade out of picks in the first round in order to acquire future first round picks, multiple certainly, then you're not moving too far back in the draft to do so. Take advantage of those because you will have a powerhouse team later on. Also, don't mention it to everyone what you're doing because you don't want to have more sellers than buyer. So keep it on the down low, and this should be good for you. Thanks for watching this till the end. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and maybe share this with your friends, or maybe not, keep this a secret just to yourself.
Yeah.
That's final words.
Like you said, like and subscribe.
All right. And check out our next video. We'll post these up regularly, so subscribe to the channel.